The level of Telegram blocking in some regions of Russia has reached 90%, reports the newspaper Kommersant. It is becoming increasingly difficult to use the service even through a VPN. Tens of thousands of users complain about outages every day. In addition, amid the shutdown of mobile internet, Russia has also begun to limit the speed of home networks. Providers are testing speed throttling and the discontinuation of unlimited plans in Yekaterinburg, St. Petersburg, and Samara. This primarily affects users who exceed the established limit.
The quality of service for users is getting worse. For many of us, for the first time since around 2008, before 2008, there really were not any unlimited plans. After 2008, they started to appear. Now, users once again find themselves having to keep track of their data usage. Leonid Yuldashev, project coordinator at Equality, in a comment to the publication Current Time.
Since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Kremlin has spent at least 35 billion rubles on internet blocking, with 12 billion spent in 2025 alone. Spending on purchases related to blocking and restricting access to information increases year by year. The largest purchase, for 7,700 million rubles, was made by the Ministry of Digital Development in January of last year. The contractor was Rostelecom.
The Moscow Times examined the procurements of Roskomnadzor, the Ministry of Digital Development, and their regional branches, as well as all procurements from 2022 to the end of 2025 that included the keywords blocking, monitoring, access restriction, internet resources, or content filtering in the procurement conditions or technical specifications. In total, the sample included 276 procurements amounting to 35 billion rubles. At the same time, 75 tenders did not specify the amount. Thus, the government's spending on internet blocking could be significantly higher, from a publication by the Moscow Times.
More and more Russians now prefer to pay in cash. In January 2026, clients of Russian banks withdrew more than 1.5 trillion rubles from their accounts. This is a record since March 2022. At that time, citizens of the Federation cashed out more than 2 trillion. At the same time, only 468 billion rubles, less than a third of the withdrawn amount, were returned to term deposits in January.
A lot more is tied to the internet now than it might seem, including government administration. After all, they even manage each other through the internet. That is, it's a bunch of municipalities, a bunch of housing offices, I don't know, a bunch of other things too. They all exchange information via the internet. They communicate with each other using documents that are sent over the internet. In the end, they also carry out bank transactions. And all the banks, let me remind you, also operate through the internet. The modern economy would simply collapse if the internet were shut off. It would collapse if, well, maybe it wouldn't collapse if YouTube were turned off, but if Google were to cut off Russia, to block Russia, then the economy could also collapse.
The increased demand for cash may be an indirect indication that part of the business sector is gradually moving into the shadows, experts say. Small and medium-sized businesses in Russia are experiencing the most serious crisis in recent decades due to unprecedented tax pressure, the increase in VAT, the cancellation of insurance premium benefits, and the high key interest rate. By the end of 2025, 1.5 times more companies closed in Russia than opened. The increase in value-added tax to 22% led to higher prices for goods and services, which negatively affected businesses and the economy as a whole. Loans in Russia are also expensive, on average at 31% per annum. Banks issue loans at twice the base rate due to the high risk of default.
Previously, the authorities said there could be no budget cuts, no reduction in government spending, and that there would be enough money for everyone, for doctors, teachers, hospitals, emergency housing, and social benefits. But now it is clear that budget cuts are ahead, and now there is information that the Ministry of Finance will cut spending by at least 10% this year.
According to sources cited by Bloomberg, the Kremlin is already prepared to reduce all so-called non-sensitive expenditures by 10%, both in the federal and regional budgets. According to Reuters, the cuts will primarily affect new infrastructure projects, as well as the construction and major repair of roads. Victoria Chastukina for Freedom TV channel. Russian occupiers have intensified troop movements and are preparing for new offensive actions in several directions at once. This was reported by Viktor Trigubov, spokesperson for the Joint Forces Group of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. He noted that at present no excessively intense actions are being observed. However, for example, in the Sumy region, there is increased enemy activity.
As of now, we are observing active attempts by the Russians to regroup and prepare for offensives on several sections of the front, such as the Velikoburluk, Kupiansk, the unofficial Borivske sector, and others. Russian troops are trying to restore their offensive potential and may become more active in the near future. Russian forces have two main objectives in this area: control over the Lyman direction and the creation of a so-called control zone along the state border. Viktor Trigubov, spokesperson for the Joint Forces Group of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, on the air of the United News Marathon.
In total, 148 combat engagements were recorded on the front over the past day. This was reported by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians attacked Ukrainian positions 28 times. In the Kostiantynivka direction, 17 times. And in the Huliaipol direction, the enemy carried out 13 assaults. On the southern Slobozhansky section of the front, the Russian army attempted to advance 8 times. In Russia's Bryansk region, Ukrainian drones destroyed a Russian radar system of the S-3 S-400 Triumph complex
and 2 Buk surface-to-air missile systems. This was reported by the commander of the UAV forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Robert Mader-Brovdim. Since the beginning of March, SPS drones have destroyed 26 Russian air defense assets at operational depth. In total, according to the commander of the UAV forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, more than 25,600 unique Russian targets have already been destroyed or hit, as well as more than 7,000 Russian soldiers. Today is the second day of negotiations in Miami between the Ukrainian and American delegations. Representing Ukraine in the negotiations are the Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council, Rustem Umerov, the head of the President's Office, Kirilo Budanov, and his deputy, Serhiy Kizlytsya. The American delegation is represented by the U.S. President's special envoys, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, as well as senior White House advisors, Josh Gruenbaum and Chris Carr. The day before, the teams discussed a number of issues, including preparations for a trilateral meeting with the Russian side, future security guarantees for Ukraine, and the country's reconstruction. According to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, the most important thing is to understand how ready the Russian side truly is for a real end to the war.
It is important for all of us in the world that
diplomatic efforts continue, and we are trying to put an end to this war, Russia's war against Ukraine. No one needs this war. The teams will continue to communicate tomorrow as well. The most important thing is to understand how ready the Russian side is to move toward a real end to the war and how willing they are to do so honestly and with dignity, especially now when the geopolitical problems have only worsened due to the situation with Iran. There will be a more detailed report from the team.
The Ukrainian delegation reported to Volodymyr Zelenskyy on the results of the first day of meetings with the American side in Miami. This was reported by Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council. Representatives of Kyiv and Washington focused on resolving key contentious issues.
They continue to discuss key issues and further steps within the framework of the negotiation track. Special attention was given to coordinating approaches for further progress and achieving practical results. We thank the United States for its active participation and consistent efforts in advancing this process. Rustem Umerov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.